Catcher in the Rye, a book in need of an editor. To begin, let's have a small preference. I do not like the book. It's not... As a matter of fact, I dislike it a lot. It's my own biases, I believe, should be apparent. With that, let's begin. Short summary. The book features Holden Simmers as an unreliable protagonist. I think, honestly, that is where the issues start. Because oftentimes the book, at least to me, feels more like it's an excuse for the author to ramble and vent rather than anything else. And yes, I do mean the author. It very much feels like they are projecting a lot more than they should. I think one of the better examples of this is in chapter 23, around page 200, Holden goes on a tirade. Notably, it is one of the only times Holden speaks for more than a page, and he starts talking at length about conciseness and one's ability to focus to a point and speak in a concise manner. Considering this is about the time in the book where the author themselves starts to write more concisely, and immediately after that results basically plot points, I don't think it's unfair to say this might indicate something. I think the best example of my complaints for this book is that it reminds me of a certain piece I read a fair bit ago. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any record of it, as... Well, I actually found it while going through Wikipedia's sources book. Well, but anyways, the piece itself was an author's retrospective, or rather a lawyer's retrospective on a recent court case, and they discuss what's happening from 3 different viewpoints. Ultimately, all of that isn't important. The point I want to make is that each of those viewpoints, it is very clearly the author taking a different perspective and then speaking from it as if that perspective were their own. It's meant to
contrast how the author's opinions are not necessarily entirely cohesive.
thing. The book as a whole, The Catcher in the Rye, it reads like that. It reads like the author is trying to take their different opinions and through the aid of, well, venting it into a page, to put it, well, a bit aggressively, that they're trying to resolve their own issue. That's at least what it feels like. Returning to the point of conciseness, I feel this is one of the greatest issues with the book. Obviously, the author does actually mention it, and how they think, and how rather Holden thinks that not being concise is something that adds character. I have to disagree with the way it's implemented, because you could have a character who's not concise without wasting the reader's time. Just in any book or narrative or anything, any story, a certain amount of suspension of disbelief is simply necessary. Let's provide a few examples. In a murder mystery, the audience does not literally expect one of the actors to die. That is generally expected as something that will not happen. In plays, you don't feature right in the middle of the most dramatic scenes. They do not feature the characters pausing and stumbling their words, trying to find the right thing to say. Characters conveniently don't have to use the bathroom or restrooms or anything like that in stories. In movies, even the more canonically quote-unquote hideous characters are often played by rather conventionally attractive actors. Obviously, that may not be the most relevant to the point, but I still feel it's worth mentioning, at least tangentially. And lastly, for example, in any story, you don't have foreign characters stumble for a moment to try to find the right words. They don't offer any visual or auditory cues. They don't pause, they don't think, they don't ponder. They don't make mistakes and say things in the wrong language. They don't awkwardly pause and, for example, provide some indication that they are still thinking, engaging in the conversation. They don't do any of that. That is something which real people do. The reason for all of those is, quite frankly, because it wastes the reader's time. And since it is a story anyways, some things can be cut out. Obviously, there's more points to that, but I feel the point is made. Just by reducing that, cutting it out, refining it, you could cut down a fair amount of the story itself. Now let's move on to the style of unreliable narration. I also have some complaints here. For most unreliable narration that I have liked, it broadly falls into a few categories. Obviously, stories are unique, but categorization is a good way for people to practice. Firstly, there's the whimsical narration, where nothing really matters. Think Alice in Wonderland. It canonically, the original, was actually a type of unreliable narration in that it's a dream sequence. There's a lot of stories like that can be very entertaining. Secondly, there's stories similar to this one, but there's some kind of baseline. There's something to compare against. There's something that is comparable and standard and stable, and you can compare and contrast the two different points so that you can get a better idea of what's going on. Lastly, there could be some kind of developments in characterization, whereas the protagonist's views actually shift over time. The way in which they think and write slowly shift. Think 1984, right? The protagonist's views shift a lot all throughout that book, and it's an unreliable narration the entire time. However, it's still clear what's going on, and you don't have to awkwardly pause and read through the lines and try to figure out what's happening to Holden, what the author's views, and what's really happening. There are a few other examples, such as stories about where names have power, but quite frankly, I don't think that's relevant here, so let's move on. Now, I think the prior point about whimsical narration perfectly exemplifies my point, because it takes all the time of a whimsical narration to get to a point with none of the joy. It's just depressing. It's not that fun. I just don't like it. Yeah. Alright. I think that adequately addresses my points. I just don't like the book that much. Yeah, I have more I could say, but I don't think it's worth saying. Bye.